Hey everybody, Eric Grenier here, and welcome to the 145th episode of the Writ Podcast. We're in the final sprint of this election campaign, and parties will be pulling out all the stops to get their voters to the polls. So to discuss what these last days of a campaign are like from the inside, I'm joined today by some veteran campaigners. Laura D'Angelo has worked tour central in federal and provincial elections for the Liberals and was Director of Campaign Operations for the Liberals in 2019. She is VP National Strategy and Public Affairs at Enterprise Canada. Melanie Paradis was Director of Communications for past Conservative Party leader Erin O'Toole and is president of Texture Communications. And Cheryl Oates was the executive director of communications and planning for former Alberta Premier Rachel Notley. She's principal at GT Executive Advisors and is the co-host of the Discourse podcast. Thanks so much for being here in these final days of this campaign.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
We're tired, but we're going to make it work.
I think that should be the slogan for all the parties at this stage, especially for a couple of them. Well, I wanted to start, we're going to talk a lot about these final days of the campaign, but there's one thing I wanted to chat about before we got to that, because there's been a lot of talk, especially among, people like us, about some of the ads that we've seen in these final days. There was the two from the Conservatives. One, it's Stephen Harper speaking to camera. Another is two older gentlemen, probably in the same demographic as Stephen Harper, playing golf and talking about how they're going to vote for the party. These came out, it seems, at the last minute. There was a report about how the casting for that Conservative ad was literally posted the same day as was shot. So I'd like to start with the process it would be for a political party to prepare ads in the middle of a campaign, when they have to change some of their strategy, try things that they weren't thinking about before. Melanie, why don't you start us off with that? How are these kinds of last minute, midst of the campaign ads produced? How do they get off the table and onto the screens?
Well, first, the ideas are generated from internal polling and where you're seeing your gaps are, and the message track that you need to be pushing to appeal to a particular demographic. In this case, in the case of the Conservative ads that we've seen in the past couple of days, specifically airing during the NHL games, those ads, yes, I have heard that they were cut within 24 hours. Between the time that they were requested and the time that they were delivered to the broadcasters, which is really an incredible turnaround. I think from a production standpoint, it's incredibly impressive to be able to pull that off, to find a location, to write a script, to get actors to do it. Like, unless you're tapping two of your staffers to go star in a commercial, it's a big production. Like, this is TV quality filming that you're doing. So a lot goes into that. And then the script itself needs to be speaking to whatever that core narrative is that you're trying to deliver to that target demographic. And again, in this case, both of those ads very clearly are targeting men over 60, specifically university educated men over 60, which is a demographic that Conservatives have held for a very long time and have lost in this election, as we've seen in the polling and in the publicly available polling.
Laura, how about you? What do you think about how these ads kind of get produced at the last minute? And is it usually the case that it's planned at the outset that there will be these kinds of last minute ads, or is it more of a reaction to what's happening on the campaign?
That's such a good question, Eric. Normally, campaigns, at least in my experience, do plan for last minute ads. They plan for big buys in the last week to varying degrees, big money spend on social media and with social ads in the last week, really micro-targeted. Producing ads this quickly in the last week is unusual, right? They might tweak scripts. They probably have some stuff prepped, but you wouldn't normally see it with a big budget ad. You would see that with their digital ads, things that can be produced, by your digital team in the campaign office or your ad team, in their advertising office. Not something like this, to Mel's point, pulling together locations, production teams, editing, actors, all of that together at the last minute. That is hard, right? That is big dollar spend. You have to be really clear-eyed on what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how you're doing it. And, I don't know that there's another way to take these particular two ads as anything other than they had to pivot, and they had to pivot hard quickly for this past week. They probably had a ton of money set aside for something. But to make this type of change this quickly, one, it is very impressive. You can't discount that. But two, it does show probably a little bit of panic setting in that war room.
Cheryl, what do you think about this? I know that when you were doing the Saskatchewan NDP campaign, they had those ads with Carla Beck playing baseball at the beginning. Like, that's the kind of thing that seems like it was prepared way ahead of time. But to have something that's like this, where you don't put the leader forward, you put a message that is much more targeted, like, how does that come about?
Yeah, I agree with both what Mel and Laura have said. Is like, usually, I mean, it's not that you know what your closing message ad is going to be, but you know you're going to have to come up with a closing message ad mid-campaign, because like in a world where you've developed your closing message before the campaign starts, I mean, the stars aligned for you if that is still your perfect ad by the end of the campaign. So the idea that parties are coming up with new ads, pulling those ads together really quickly, getting the buy out, I mean, I'm sure they had the buy already, getting those ads placed like really quickly is not new. But I agree with what Laura said. The idea that you were doing like a casting call, the idea that you got out on the golf course, the idea that you got these two people to do their scripts in a way that, you know, looks pretty professional, and then got that all out is super impressive. I think they probably did in this timeline forgo testing. Yeah. So in the campaigns that I've worked on, you know, you put in, even if you want to move really fast, you want to know that the buy that you're about to make is worth the dollars that you're spending. And so you would spend, I don't know, 48 hours, 72 hours testing the ads to make sure that they were having the effect that you hope for. I don't think this ad had time for testing, but I mean, if they're speaking to upper middle class white golfers, like it's hard to believe that message wouldn't work.
It's so specific though, Melanie, to like literally have the people you're trying to appeal in the ad. Is there no room for subtlety anymore?
No, not at this stage in the game. There's no room at all. You know, there was no subtlety in Stephen Harper's ad either. I mean, he was specifically saying, "I've worked with both these men. You need like vote for Pierre Poilievre." Interestingly, you know, and he actually said his name, and so while there was no visual of Pierre Poilievre in either of these commercials, certainly the one with Stephen Harper, he very full-throatedly endorsed him, and really what they're speaking to is, if you voted for Stephen Harper, if you're the demographic who voted for Stephen Harper, you need to vote for Pierre Poilievre. That is the message, because unfortunately the way the polling looks, the Conservatives have lost much of that demographic.
Laura, just if we're talking about, you know, more broadly the ads, it feels like these conservative ads have caught a lot of attention, which, you know, whether they're good or bad, the fact that they've gotten some attention is something. Obviously, a bad ad is worse than having an ad that no one sees. But I haven't really seen much commentary on the Liberal ads or the NDP ads. Have they? What do you think of how the other parties have handled this, the advertising space?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm one of those typical millennials who doesn't watch, you know, regular network TV. So I've seen them all on social media. And I'll say, I think that the Liberals' social ads have been pretty good, right? I think that they have had probably close to, up until this ad, the one sort of viral moment with that Mike Myers ad way back at the beginning. But honestly, I don't think the advertising really from any party up until this point has really broken through in a way we've seen in other campaigns. There's normally one or two ads at the start of a campaign or just before that makes everyone kind of shocked. We haven't really seen that this time. And I think it's really interesting, right? To me, it indicates that so much is actually being pushed on social media this time around, in a way that we're probably not used to seeing. It's also, we see so much talk about this, but campaign ads are not a time to be pushing creatively, right? There's tried and true things that work in advertising for campaigns and elections. And right now is not the time to win those awards for creativity, and get yourself named to that, right? It's time to do something that works. And so to your earlier point about these very unsubtle ads, they are unsubtle. They also are the way people talk, right? They're the way you hear boomer dads and grandparents talking in neighborhoods and on golf courses. And so I do think there's some power there. And we've certainly all seen these ads, right? I would be hard pressed to name many others from any of the campaigns, but I can tell you very clearly about both of these ads, even if they don't speak to me.
Yeah, I don't watch a lot of live TV that much, but even I've seen those ads. I've seen those ads probably 3 or 4 times already just in the last couple of days.
Yeah, it's between periods in every hockey game.
Yeah, I guess
you
that's
can't
kind
miss
of.
them.
But
Yeah.
I've seen some other ads. I'm not just watching hockey, but from what I've seen them more than anything else. Anyway, and maybe the other ones just aren't as memorable, so I don't remember seeing them. Cheryl, what do you think of the ads that we've seen so far in this campaign?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm the outlier here. I haven't really seen social media ads, but I have definitely seen them as, we get into the hockey playoffs and sports are just playing constantly in the background of my house. Not necessarily by my choice, but they are. I've just seen like the ads over and over and over again in the sporting events. I think like I found this last Liberal ad where it was basically like Carney's resume compared to Pierre's time as a politician. I found that quite compelling. I think when you think about like the place that we're at in the campaign right now, where we're not talking about introducing Mark Carney anymore, we're not talking about discrediting the Conservatives anymore, we're really motivating people to vote now. I think for people who were, leaning toward the Liberals, but maybe their vote wasn't solid, that is a really good motivator for them. And also, like, it was an edit suite ad. It was easy to cut. They didn't have to line up actors or make a casting call for that. So I think that was probably a smart use of resources. And then when it comes to the NDP, like if you look at the spends over this campaign, the NDP is just not competitive. Yeah. Like the NDP's money was not going into big air campaigns. And that is typical. Like in Saskatchewan, we had that really cool ad out of the gate. But in terms of the money we spent on that ad by running it in the Labor Day Classic, we got this incredible profile out of it that it wasn't a regular ad campaign. But truthfully, like most of our money went into different advertising strategies or ground game. And that is how like the NDP's had such a targeted campaign. I imagine that that's what they're doing as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably targeting where they have their incumbents, especially. Okay, speaking of where the incumbents are, I want to talk about this next topic, tour, and these final days. There's a lot of focus on where the leaders are spending these last few days of the campaign. We've seen that Mark Carney has been to the Maritimes, he's been to Quebec, he's now in the BC Lower Mainland, he went to Vancouver Island. We've seen Poilievre has been mostly in the GTA, and then today he was in Nova Scotia. And we've seen Jagmeet Singh largely staying in the BC Lower Mainland and on Vancouver Island. Then he went to Edmonton, and he's gone as well to Winnipeg. And Yves-François Blanchet has been going to the ridings where the Bloc is in contention there. Laura, since I know you were this was your specialty, what is the thinking that goes into where the leader goes in that final week?
So generally when you plan your final week of tour, you're thinking about two key things. One, how do you get, especially if you're competing for government, how do you get them across the whole country? Because they have to go end to end. And the second one is, how do you play offensively? So how are you getting to the ridings where you have a real shot? Again, when you're competing for government, Jagmeet Singh has a very different calculus right now. And so what I find super interesting right now is watching Pierre Poilievre and Mark Carney both going to really competitive parts of their electoral map, right? It is interesting to me that Pierre Poilievre is going to Nova Scotia. That is a pretty offensive, competitive play for him to be making right now that I wouldn't necessarily have called looking at the publicly available polling. Mark Carney is doing what I would say has become, Liberals have become known for it in the final week of the campaign, the final few days since 2015. They have gone from east all the way west. If they can manage a stop north in the final week, they will. And we are seeing that play out again. It's also, you have to think about when you're planning a tour, and this is really in the weeds of it, but it can be really interesting, is the way these plane contracts are negotiated. You hear so much about the planes, but you get a certain number of flying hours and you get a certain number of stops. And so you also have to layer in the logistics of that around how can we actually do this without going over our hours and costing more money, because normally, if your campaign has the budget, you are spending to that top dollar on that final day. And so you cannot go over your plane hours because then you break the Elections Canada spending rules. And so it is actually a really complicated puzzle that your tour team and your field team have to piece together to hit across the board.
Laura, I'd never heard of that before. That's really interesting. Yeah. So when would that calculation have been made? Where they would go? Like how long ago did the Liberals know that Carney was starting off in in Atlantic Canada?
Same as the rest of the tour. You do it generally in a 3 to 4 day swing. So you would build a week to 10 day look ahead, but it won't get locked until a few days before.
Melanie, what do you think about the importance of these final stops in the last week of a campaign?
There are so many different things to take into consideration. So you want to go to target seats. So that part of like where we're seeing leaders is definitely part of that calculus of which ridings are being targeted by them as pickups, but also holds. So where is it that you could lose this seat? And so you want to show a strong presence. You want the leader to be there to get some excitement going so that people get out and vote. So you get that local media coverage to remind people that they need to get out, that their region matters to that leader. But at the same time, to play devil's advocate, you're also pulling all your get out the vote volunteers off the doors in order to do this, especially if it's rallies. If the leader's just going there to do like a press conference and like stand in front of some iconic, hi, I'm in Halifax, clearly, like this is this place is important to me, deliver some remarks, and then you kind of get out of there. That's not as big of a lift in terms of pulling your local your regional organization off the doors. In this week, like it's really important that all volunteers be pulling vote to the best of their ability. And like if you're holding rallies at this point, you better be getting data from everybody that's going to that rally so that you can call them on election day and make sure that they vote.
Cheryl, you've been with the NDP on campaigns in Alberta and Saskatchewan, so the map was always a little bit more targeted, right? In both of those provinces for the NDP, they knew where they had to go, and it was a very limited kind of number of places you could go. Jagmeet Singh kind of has the same kind of thing here, where he's probably targeting a dozen seats to make sure they get party status and a few extra ones. So how do you design that tour when it has to be extremely targeted on specific ridings rather than broader regions like the mainland or GTA?
I almost think it's easier. Like they're very specific. They can target the resources. They can say, we're going to hit up Victoria and Vancouver for 2 days of the last week. Then we're just going to work our way east in this case. And they only need Jagmeet only needs to stop in like a couple of ridings in each center. It's not like he needs to speak to a big group of people. He needs to go motivate people in in some cases, one specific riding in a city. That seems much easier to me than trying to basically rally a country behind you. I wanted to add a couple points because the end of the tour is I always find it's a very funny place in the campaign, because up to this point, you've, as a party, likely been rolling out policy announcements and talking about what the implications of those announcements are. And in the last week, you have to come up with some kind of color, something to say, something cool that someone will put on TV or people will watch on TikTok that is not policy focused. And after a while, that starts to feel kind of silly. So it's it is really an art to come up with these last week GeoTV events, and then layer them with events in the evening that hopefully get more volunteers turned out because the leader's in town and people want to be where the leader is and where the energy is. And then the other fun thing that might happen in the last week, and I've been part of almost every campaign I've been on with the NDP, we've done this, is how do you, even if you're not viable in some areas, what can you do as a campaign that supports your narrative that you are? So in Saskatchewan, for example, part of our narrative was we are actually competitive in rural. And I believe that to be true, although we didn't win rural seats outside of the north. But part of sending that message to rural voters to say that the NDP is a viable option here was spending one of those precious days in the last week with the leader making a trip out to Yorkton and back and stopping in rural centers along the way. Then the media go oh, she's spending her time doing that. They must really be competitive in those seats. So some of it is smoke and mirrors, and some of it is actual GeoTV.
And that's a great point, Cheryl. In the final week is where you really see a lot of whistle stops, a lot of bus touring, because you can do 6 hits in a day with really interesting visuals that don't necessarily need an announcement attached. And this is where you start to see some of those really unusual, beautiful photos or videos, because it's more about, something for producers to put on TV as a really good shot or put in their newspaper when there's not a lot of substance there. And to Mel's point, you can do a lot of we're going to do a big door knocking push today for 4 hours, but you're going to come meet the leader first and then we're going to go. And that's how you can get everybody to one place. So there's a lot of, to Cheryl's point, smoke and mirrors, but totally different techniques in the final week than you use in the first 4 to 8, depending on the campaign.
But you can imagine I'm thinking as a journalist, because once upon a time I was one, like the story in Alberta, for example, the story of like Rachel Notley rallies people in Edmonton, like boring, like the NDP has won all those seats. But in the last campaign, hundreds turn out for a rally with Rachel Notley in Medicine Hat. Like there's a story.
Exactly.
So it's kind of like, what can you do that people might care about or notice in the last week?
Okay, so there is an element of narrative building with the visits and that kind of thing. And we'll just finish on this question on this one. And Laura, I'll give it to you because you did this so much. What is the actual purpose of these visits? Is it to motivate the voters? Is it to motivate the volunteers? Like, what is the actual point to making these stops so targeted in the last week of a campaign?
So it's all of the things you just said, right? It is to motivate your volunteers and the people who are going to do GOTV. It's to motivate your voters in those target ridings that you're going to. But to Cheryl's point, it's also to keep the air war going, right? One of the things that you want to do is show momentum, show that it is still trucking for you. People are still showing up for you. They're still excited. Canadians still want to vote for you. And so the point of doing all these stops and keeping them tight, keeping that momentum pushing, showing all of these big groups is so that as you lead into E-Day, and there's really not a lot to report on except for these stops, it's about all of the people.
Okay. All right. Now we're finally getting to the final thing. Get out the vote. This is what, I mean, these campaign organizations are really all about by the end of the last day. We saw a huge amount of people already voted in the advance poll, over 7 million. We've seen that there's big jumps in advance polls for each of the last 3 elections, and it didn't actually always line up with greater turnout. So who knows? Could have just been people voting because it was more convenient. But the first step in get out the vote is knowing who your vote is. Mel, how is that? What is that process? What is the literal way that people identify their vote within a riding?
Okay. So over the course of years, you've been knocking on doors in your riding, hopefully with like a team of volunteers, and hopefully you've been doing this like throughout over the past few months. However, in this particular circumstance, when things have shifted, attitudes have changed, the leader of the Liberal Party has changed. Like, it's not Justin Trudeau anymore. The person whose door you knocked on 6 months ago, who said, I'm absolutely with you, I'm totally voting for Pierre, I'm so sick of Trudeau, you need to knock on that door again, because that data isn't necessarily reliable. Because now, if you knock on that door, that person might say like, well, Trudeau's gone, so like, their tone has changed. So what happens is we, for the Conservative Party, we've got an app on our phones. I think Liberals in the NDP, I think everybody's got an app on their phone now. And volunteers go to the door, you knock on the door, you're supposed to, it's kind of a garbage in, garbage out scenario, where if the data that you're inputting is garbage, the data that you have to deal with, like to do your forecasting and to do your predictions and see like which ridings you think you're ahead in, may also be garbage as a result. So you really need to train your volunteers that when they're putting the data in, that they do a really good job and that they be honest. Some volunteers are going to go to the door and someone's going to be like, best of luck, have a great day, but not actually tell them like, yes, I am definitely voting for this person. They'll just be like very polite, and someone might be like, oh, that person's totally with us, and they'll mark them down as like a 5 out of 10 when they are not. Then they should have been a 2. You don't know what they are, right? You did not get the information. And so part of the challenge that you have, that all the parties have, is did your volunteers input that data appropriately? And then on election day, the reason why this is so important is you want to go to all those doors of the people who told you, yes, I am going to vote for your candidate. And you pull the vote. You call them, you call their house and harass them, you knock on their door until they say like, please stop, I voted, go away. And even then there's a bit of a lag, because we'll send people to polling stations, and just for folks at home, we don't actually know how you voted, but you do have like a voter ID number, and it's kind of blind. We can't really see who it's for, but once we input the voter ID number, it removes you from the call list. Basically, we can see this person has voted. So then you'll stop being harassed, which is another reason why you should vote in the advanced polls, right? Because you won't get door knocked.
Or never speak to a political party and tell them anything at all.
Yes, or tell them nothing. Don't put a sign up.
But do you only, Melanie, do you just start with the tens?
No, like I mean, every party will have their own calculus of who you're going after. But you definitely want your likelies and your definites to be, you want them to be going out and voting.
Okay.
And then you don't pull vote for the rest of them, basically.
Okay.
You don't bother reminding other people to vote.
Laura, anything, and Cheryl asked the same thing, just anything to add to upon what Melanie was saying?
Go for it, Cheryl.
So the NDP uses a really similar system. The NDP, when they knock on your door, rank you as supporting us, leaning to us, undecided, or not voting for us. And then, you might have someone come back closer to the election and confirm that that is still the case, just like Melanie said. And then basically we take that data and model it across a riding because, either you don't have enough capacity to knock every door in the riding or you haven't knocked every door recently, but basically model it across the riding. And then you can say, depending on what's happening in the election, okay, we're going to pull ones. Or, in the case of Saskatchewan, there was this massive, massive undecided vote that appeared to be breaking towards us. So we pulled our people who were supporting us and we pulled the undecideds in lots of ridings where the modeling showed that those numbers were breaking to us. But it is like a big data team that sits with all these numbers, looks at how they're breaking, looks at how people are turning out, looks at how they're reporting that they're voting for us. And basically every riding could look a little bit different in terms of what vote you're pulling. And kudos to that team, because I understand just like the tip of the iceberg in terms of the data tools that are available, but really there are still people in the NDP that would love to go to the door with their clipboard and their piece of paper. But the tools have really sophisticated the process of not only collecting data, but modeling data and then knowing which data to pull in which ridings.
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar in Liberal land to exactly what Mel and Cheryl are describing. I would say I think one of the things I find fascinating about GOTV and door knocking generally, certainly something I was guilty of misconstruing when I first started in politics, is a lot of people think that political volunteers are coming to your door and knocking on it to convince you to vote for their person. And that's not really what's happening. They just want to know, right? Are you interested in us? Are you not interested in us? Are you a maybe? And then we can go from there. But it's not really it's not like a door-to-door salesman, right? That's not really the game. It really is about getting out the vote and convincing people to get to the polls, not necessarily to vote for you, but to go to the polls because you already know if they're voting for you or not.
Well, Laura, that's only if the candidate listened to your
Correct,
advice
Mel.
about how to knock on doors, because there are many candidates and volunteers who will actually try to convince people, and they'll waste an hour on the doors trying to convince people when they could have knocked 15, 20 other doors. The other reason why these apps are so handy is HQ, headquarters, can see how many doors you've knocked that day. And they will then harass you. You didn't knock enough doors, and you have to do more. And so it's an animal.
And a tip for up-and-coming political volunteers, what Mel is describing when you get trapped at a door, longtime politicos like the three of us will do that to opposing parties. Like if an NDP or a Conservative come and knock on my door, I will hold them at the door for as long as humanly possible.
Tell me more.
Exactly.
Can
I
get you
might
water?
consider it.
I was thinking when you said, we know that you're just there to ID vote, you're not there to convince someone. But it's funny when you see these videos from doorbell cameras pop up on social media and you see the candidate go and say, hey, I'm here on behalf of X party. And they say, no, thank you. And they're like, okay, have a good day. And everyone's like, oh, they don't care about you unless you support them. And anyone who's worked on a campaign is like, good job, door knocker.
That's right.
Exactly
and you see them run down the driveway to the next house. You're like, that's right. That's how you do it. At this stage as well, because we're less than a week out, the war room has now been dispatched, or should have been by now. Everyone's war rooms should have been redeployed. And for those listening at home, what I mean by this is the people who are volunteering in headquarters for each of the party campaigns. There's no job on the campaign right now that is more important than knocking on doors and pulling vote. And so everyone, no matter how important you think your job is in the war room, gets sent out to a riding, to a target seat, to go help, because finding good volunteers is hard. And so you need to send your people, every able-bodied person that you have, out to go do that, do exactly that, knock on doors, drop lit, whatever it is that needs to be done. And so this is about the time when you start to see war room staffers being deployed, and where they're being sent is also instructive. So that's also good for understanding what's happening behind the scenes, because where they're being sent tells you where they feel like they can either make gains or where they need to be protecting themselves.
And to circle this back to tour and what we were talking about earlier, the tour team, both in Central and the actual advanced teams, are some of the few people who are not deployed until E-Day, because that tour still has to keep running, right? So to our earlier point, you still have your leader and the bus and the plane and all of the media, if they're traveling with them, traveling across the country. Someone still has to execute those events and advance those events in all the locations. And so it becomes, those teams start doing this really bare bones because they don't have the central machine behind them. They have only the tour teams and volunteers on the ground.
A reasonably well organized and resourced local campaign. What's a realistic goal in terms of IDing the vote? Like 25% of it, 50% of it? If you're a good local campaign, do you know all of your voters, or is it just if you can reach 1 in 3, you're doing a good job? I don't know if anybody has an answer.
I think it depends where you are. Like, I think of Saskatchewan, the ridings are small, like really small. And so like we had people hitting like 40%, 60% of their doors because for a city the size of Regina, there's a lot of seats in there. And so the ridings are a lot smaller, and that's easy. On a federal campaign, that's a lot tougher to do. And like you think about territories, like pretty much impossible. It's a whole different campaign.
Yeah. Like I'm in Bay of Quinte, and our riding is enormous. It is all of Prince Edward County. It is Belleville. It is Trenton. It's everything like north of the Fort. Like, there's a lot of area. And so there are just doors that are never going to get knocked because it doesn't make sense to send anybody to that particular area because there's like 3 houses in, a 5-kilometer stretch.
And conversely, you look at, really densely populated urban areas, it's also a little bit easier sometimes to predict these 3 blocks, right? Or these 6 square blocks are all going to break one way or the other. We actually don't need to go knock every door there because we know they're likely to vote and we know which way they're voting.
Mm-hmm. And actually, I will add that in the Ontario election that we just had 2 months ago, because the weather was so horrendous, it made door knocking in certain neighborhoods prohibitive, but it did give an opportunity for everyone to door knock apartment buildings. And so that's an interesting and different data set that we may not have had as much of an emphasis on in the past. So now you've got like your data is kind of updated on how people living in apartments are voting, depending on the riding. And I just think that the weather factor is also an interesting consideration when it comes to getting out the vote.
Cheryl, just for a dummy like me who doesn't actually do any of this stuff, the get out the vote on election day, is it literally just calling people, or are you literally taking people to the polls? Like, how are you literally getting the vote out?
Any way possible. So you'll have people volunteer that say, I will literally go knock on doors, and you'll stop by at 1:00 and no one will answer. And then you'll go back at like 1:30 and no one will answer. And then the next team will come in and they'll knock that door basically until the polls are closed to make sure that person who's listed as voting for your party has gone and voted. There'll be some people who want to volunteer, but can't necessarily, they physically can't go knock on doors all day long. They can text, they can call. All local campaign offices, as well as usually central phone banks, are doing that all day long from the times the polls open to the times they close. And part of that offer is like, do you know where your polling station is? Do you need a ride to your polling station? Do you need any assistance in your polling station? Does the rest of your family need any help? Yeah. Like basically anything a campaign can offer to make it easier for you to vote, they're ready to do it.
Like I've driven random strangers to the polling station because that was the task that they needed me to fill.
Exactly. There's every party, every really experienced field organizer or volunteer has stories of like, I babysat someone's children. I made them mac and cheese this night. I took their grandma to here. Like, they were pulling the groceries out of the car, so I unloaded the groceries so they could walk down the street to the school and vote. Like, everyone has these kind of crazy sounding, but very real E-Day stories.
And when the polls closed, does everybody breathe a sigh of relief and just start being nervous?
No, then you're scrutineering. Then you're in the polling station so it's funny for me because in Ontario it's all digital now, right? Like you put your ballot in a Scantron and we have the results like instantly. Whereas now we're still hand counting everything federally. So you will go to a polling station and you will sit there, and once they start opening the boxes and counting them, you stand there and you look at every single ballot. And if there's a problem with the ballot, you say like, I don't know about that one. That one's questionable. Let's take another look at it. That one should be removed for whatever reason. Like there's lots of jobs to be done until the final count is in.
That's like my least favorite part. Like I think to Saskatchewan, where obviously I was running that campaign, so I wasn't scrutineering, but like there's something for me to do until the polls close. Like there's nothing else for me to do in the campaign. The leader has done their thing. You know, she's going to take some downtime with her family before we start seeing results come in. I can go pull vote until the polling places close, and then once the polling places close, then I'm just going to drive myself crazy for like the next few hours, especially in places where they're like Alberta, where the results, it took hours and hours and hours to come in. It's like, maybe I could go do this now. That took 15 minutes. What else can I, distract myself with? And then a lot of it is like, if you're working in data, like you're watching the numbers come in, deciding like, what does that mean in terms of your path to victory? That was, a really big job on Saskatchewan, where the numbers were really tight and we had, a very narrow path to victory, is for them to tell me our scrutinies are telling us this path is still open, this path is now closed. And then for me to sit with the leader and either say like, we still have a shot, or, it's getting really unlikely, or, it's over. We're going to lose the election and we have to now make the call to the other leader.
And that's when you update your speeches. So hopefully by then you will have written. So in 2021, I was on maternity leave. I had a 3-month-old on election day, but I still wrote the leaders' speeches. And when you have to update them, right? Because you don't know exactly what the result's going to be. And you sit down with them and you say like, okay, here's how so you want to have multiple versions written for multiple scenario and outcomes. And then you tweak whichever one is the closest to what has happened, to meet the moment in the remarks.
And I will add a very funny, to me, anecdote. So what Cheryl's talking about, those e-nights when, you're waiting, the polls are closed and you're waiting, and the most senior campaign team and the people closest with the leader, often the bus team, are so anxious. My role in every election I've ever worked, I normally run the big e-night event, because it is a job that you can do from central tour so that you can keep your advance teams focused on advance. And I would always keep a list of completely non-essential jobs that had to happen on e-night at the event for people like Cheryl. So I could, when I would see them pace, I'd be like, oh my God, Cheryl, everything is happening. I don't know if I can find enough signs to make the sign trees we need. The room is looking empty. I think they said there's some in fill in the blank space. I know you're probably so much busier than I am. Can you please go check? And without fail, the senior person just wants them. Like, they just need a job.
Laura, bless you. That is such a kind service. If someone had offered me any job in the last 3 elections that I worked on, I would have wholeheartedly taken
any job.
Yeah.
The sign trees for all of these young politicos who I hope listen to this pod, senior people want a job. Sign trees is perfect because they can keep an eye on data. They can keep checking their phone. It doesn't take a lot of brain power, but it feels like busy, important work that has to happen.
And then you also need someone who's not like going to be a stress spaz machine to deal with the family. Yes. The family of the leader, the children of the leader, the spouse of the leader. Like, you need someone who's very calm and collected to keep them distracted as well, because they are going to be stress balls.
I think too, and this is like not talked about a lot because usually the circle is small. Like, I've worked on a number of campaigns that didn't win and a lot of really disappointing losses. And in all of those cases, the team on the campaign believed wholeheartedly that we would win, even when it was like very unlikely. And so, the ability to communicate with your leader and say, it's not there. And then to be able to quietly go away and work on a concession speech and make those calls without upsetting everyone else who's watching the results come in. And then to be able to tell your close team, thank you, but we're going to tell you first, it's not there. We're about to concede. That is a really big internal moment for a campaign, and I think can be the difference between people who worked in the campaign coming back for another campaign or not. Like how you handle that moment and how you help people, feel appreciated, but also understand that this wasn't our time. To me, those have been like very, very memorable moments on campaigns.
I would just say on concession speeches, if any of the political parties listening to this haven't yet written theirs, please do. Please do it now. Write it. Even if you believe ardently that you will not need it, write it. You need a break in case of emergency script, because it is reprehensible to leave your leader without words in a very difficult moment, especially if their hopes have been raised. So always make sure that you have a concession speech handy, and hope that you never need it, but you've got it. You have to have it ready.
And the same goes for the order of proceedings for that night, right? Like you don't necessarily know when it's going to get called and when you have to go out and speak, but there's pretty strict convention in Canada for how these phone calls, who calls who, when you make those calls, who gets to go out first and speak, when the next person gets to go out, how much is covered, what isn't covered. It's really important that your leader understands all of those various scenarios and that the team around them does, because it can be really, really hard if you don't understand that and something changes, something unexpected happens, and all of a sudden everything's upended. And not only is your leader and the people around them probably heartbroken or really elated, you also now have to try to explain to them what's going to happen, and they're not going to be there. And so they need to kind of have it already locked. These are, scenario 1, 2, 3, and how that's going to look.
It's been really fascinating to get this human element of what actually goes behind these the campaigns. We always just talk about polls and all these big picture stuff, and it's just really interesting throughout this campaign to hear from all of you about what goes on behind the scenes. So I really appreciate it. And I've really appreciated the time that you've taken throughout this campaign to join me on the podcast. Gotten a lot of great feedback from these episodes. So hopefully we can chat again after the election. Maybe we can talk about how difficult it is to get people to pick up the signs after the But anyway, thanks to all three of you, and have a good election night.
Thank you so much.